in this new era we're living in, what is canceled?
It's hard to keep up.
Why are we canceling, I guess, is the bigger question. What is canceled and why? Michael Knowles is with us. Michael's the host of the Daily Wire's The Michael Knowles Show and PragerU's The Book Club, and the #1 national best-selling author of Reasons to Vote for Democrats, a comprehensive guide. He's got a brand new book out called Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
Michael, I'm sure you've been canceled about 10,000 times. John and I have been canceled a few times. In fact, some guy called in during the break, and he was canceling us. He was angry that we were talking about vinyl records.
How dare you?
So yeah, people can go on a moral crusade, Michael, about all sorts of things. But you feel like our obsession with cancel culture and complaining about it has gotten the best of us?
I do. I think, to your point on having attempts made on our careers, to cancel us, there's a line from Churchill, which is that there's nothing more exhilarating than to be shot at without result. So it's good that
that's a good quote.
But I do think we're focusing a little too much as conservatives on the fact that there is a cancel culture. Obviously, there's something going on right now where the left is trying to ruin all of our careers and our lives for stating perfectly obvious things, like that men are not women, or that babies are babies, or that vinyl records,
have a place, Michael.
Of course, but the fact is, all cultures cancel. In the 1950s, you would be canceled for being a communist. Today, you will be canceled for not being a communist. The fact that you can be canceled has not changed, but what you will be canceled for has. And I think that's really the big issue. I think what conservatives have missed on this whole phenomenon of political correctness and wokeness, cancel culture, is that it's not so much about a battle between free speech and censorship, but it's more a battle between competing sets of standards. What are we going to support as a society? What are we going to oppose? If you waved the hammer and sickle in the 50s, you get canceled. Today, you get canceled if you wave the stars and stripes.
Right. Okay, so we're worried, though, a lot of people are, or angry, or whatever you want to, adjective you want to put in there, that our conservative traditional values are being wiped away. And how dare you wipe those away? That's the problem with cancel culture.
Yeah, I think that's what it really comes down to, is it's an attack on traditional standards and traditional values and our traditional way of life. And this is part of a really well-orchestrated and planned campaign. I think many people believe political correctness goes back to, the 70s or 80s. But all human species, it goes back really to the 1920s, and it involves a systematic and gradual infiltration of all of our institutions in our society by the left, including the government, but even beyond the government, the media and the schools and the big corporations. And now they have a huge amount of political power. So while these radicals might constitute a minority of the population, they've got outsized political power, and I think that it's incumbent upon conservatives to fight back against this, not merely with the procedural arguments of defending free speech in the abstract, for instance, but with the substantive arguments. Because I think free speech in the abstract is all well and good, but it doesn't mean anything to people who don't have anything to say.
Right. So, and not having anything to say is part of the problem, right? So, we can talk about the erosion of free speech, which I know you have, spoken of, and perhaps spoken against our obsession with that as well. But really, it comes down to whether we're substantive people anymore who really have anything to say.
That's right. And we're going to be accused of being theocratic, illiberal, authoritarian, whatever words they always call conservatives. But they actually have a point in the sense that, at bottom, all human conflict is theological, as Cardinal Manning points out. That really, when we're arguing about political issues, whether it's immigration or taxes or capital punishment, we're making moral arguments. So we're referring to a moral order, and that has something to do with religion. There's no such thing as a firm separation of church and state. There never has been in any country in history, nor can there be, because we have to make moral arguments. And so we have a state religion now. It's the state religion of wokeism. It's the state religion of secular progressivism. I think these days probably Dr. Fauci is the high pontiff of that religion. And so we need to be willing to make value judgments and say some things are good and others are bad, and some are right and others are wrong, and some are true and others are false. And we've got to be willing to stand by that. There's nothing illiberal or authoritarian about that. That's just the basic element of government.
Right. Okay, but when you say that, Michael, when you say that, a woman cannot be a man, all of a sudden, you're a transphobe or a homophobe or a xenophobe or a sexist or a racist
or an anti-Olympian.
All those things come together, and they, the labels shut us down quickly. It's hard to sort of dig out of the hole when you're being called all these things, and you're just following along, which I believe, are biblical values, and there's a historical precedent to follow that along.
Of course. What the left does so well is win the debates before the debates ever happen. Mm-hmm. Right? If you begin with this premise of transphobia, that the belief that a man is not a woman is an irrational fear, which is what phobia means, well, then you've already won the debate. But I don't think there's anything irrational. Actually, I think it's irrational to believe that a man can be a woman. And this is why the left focuses on language so much. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I will hear conservatives say, when we're debating the pronouns, which we seem to do constantly these days, they'll say, oh, who cares about the pronouns? And my answer is, the left cares about the pronouns. The left seems to care a lot. They're investing a lot of time and energy and resources into getting us to call men she and women he. And the reason they're doing that is because words carry whole premises. And so if the question is, should she, Caitlyn Jenner, be allowed to use the ladies' room? Well, then obviously she should. She's a she after all. But if he, Bruce Jenner, tries to go into the ladies' room, well, that's obviously wrong. He shouldn't be able to do that. So the battle is going to take place first on the level of language. And if they win the linguistic battle, very often they'll win the later political battles with ease.
Michael Knowles is with us. His brand new work is called Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds. All right, so I was going to ask you a different question, but what you said there is compelling to me. What about language? I mean, how do we, if the battle is over language, and I think in many ways, not just in this sector, but in all sorts of sectors, the battle is how we label things. Right, and that label, that initial label, that word we attach to something, can really determine an entire worldview. How, and that seems like the crux of the problem. How do we become people who are better at what, as Marilyn McIntyre says, caring for words in a culture of lies? Well, like how do we get better at that, and how do we produce people who are better at that?
Very often the people who frame the argument win the argument. The greatest example I see actually is the same-sex marriage debate that happened 8 or 10 years ago, in no small part because there never was any debate. If there were a debate over same-sex marriage, the debate would be over what is marriage. For everywhere in all of history, people believed that sexual difference had something to do with marriage. Then some radicals came along and they said, no, sexual difference doesn't have anything to do with marriage. So, okay, you can have that debate. But what the left did very clearly in that debate was they assumed their own conclusion. They said, look, we all know that sexual difference has nothing to do with marriage. So the question is, who has the right to get married? They already assumed that sexual difference was involved. And so when it became a battle of the right to participate in an institution they had already redefined, well, they had already won that because none of us want to deprive anybody of rights. And so they're very good at this, I think, because, one, they dominate the institutions. So they dominate the media, they dominate the academy, they now dominate big technology. And so they are able to shape the way that we use language from grade school all the way up to when we're posting on Twitter. Right. And I think it's incumbent upon us to take back some influence within all of those institutions, the so-called private sector ones, but the government too.
Yeah, and don't you think, Michael, that also it has something to do with the language they choose appears more generous?
Yeah.
It appears I don't think that conservatives are particularly good at that.
Yeah, no, I think you make a very good point. The left has gotten us to believe, can you imagine this? They've gotten us to believe that lying to somebody is compassionate. They've done it very well, but they now have gotten us to believe that if you call a man who thinks that he's a woman, if you call him a woman, then you are the compassionate one. Yes. And if you tell the man that he's actually a man, that you're somehow cruel. I mean, they've actually gotten us to believe that lies are compassionate, and that the truth is cruel, when actually the traditional understanding of our culture is lies are disrespectful and the truth will set you free. So it goes back even to that more fundamental level, but your observation is absolutely right. They have effectively portrayed themselves as the nice people.
Right. Okay, so then the so-called, marriage debate or the culture wars or the battle that we're talking about. Now, Michael, as you just said, it's controlled by big tech or big entertainment or, any big publishing. They're in control. So how do you stand a chance whenever they control the megaphone? And, here we are on a smaller megaphone, and especially when they're in the schools, whether it's kindergarten all the way through the master's degree or PhD programs, they're informing our children as to how they should live. The battle doesn't seem like it's much of a battle.
Right. There's the cultural aspect. Obviously, we've got to tell these stories at least somewhat nearly as well as the left does. And so when we're talking about compassion, let's talk about the kids who were pushed into a transgender surgery and came to regret it years later and face irreversible damage. Yeah. Let's talk about the kids who have been inundated with critical race theory and made to feel awful about themselves because of the color of their skin and the anxiety and even in some cases suicide that can produce. Those are stories worth telling. But then there's the political challenge as well. And you're seeing Governor Ron DeSantis do this very well down in Florida. Some other governors are following suit, which is we've got to go in and say there is a limit. We are not going to permit you to push these radical ideologies in schools. We're going to ban them. We don't like using this word ban. We feel uncomfortable as conservatives using the arm of the government. But look, the people give us political power for a reason, and it is incumbent upon us to use that political power to craft a just society. Because there will be standards, there will be limits to the way that we live, and I think we should set those limits in terms of not transing students and not making people feel awful on the basis of their race. I think we've got to step up and have the courage to wield that political power.
Mm-hmm. So then what happens then is that people are leaving. A lot of people are leaving, the traditional cultural institutions. I'm taking my kid out of the public schools and I choose to put my kid in a private school. At least that way, they'll get a straight education. But, for a lot of people who can't afford that or choose not to do that, then we're going to suffer. So we lose the public domain. And then, what goes on from there?
This is exactly the problem. I think that homeschooling is a great option and private school is a great option, but both of those options are expensive. You need to have a parent who can stay home and raise the kid, which is difficult in a tough economy, and you need to spend thousands and thousands of dollars if you want to send a kid to public school, and that's not doable for everybody. So I think that the conservative strategy for the past several decades has been one of retreat. The universities are lost. Let's forget about it. The media, it's a lost cause. Let's forget about it. Even the grade schools, it's lost. That's not really fair. That's not really just. And I think it's really what it is an expression of is cowardice. It is up to governors. It is up to school boards set these sorts of standards. And the standards will be set. It occurs to me, actually, that you can teach any book you want in a school right now. You can teach Robin DiAngelo, critical race theory. You could probably teach Mein Kampf in a school. There's only one book that, according to the Supreme Court, you're not allowed to teach. Right. And that's the Bible. that is a perverse and actually inverted culture. And I think that it's obviously not a neutral playing ground, and we've got to take that power back to our political advantage to set the culture on the right course.
All right, Michael, we're almost done. I have a minute left for you. Let me ask you a question. And maybe this is unfair right out of the gate, but my question is, how do we pick our hill to die on? Like, how do you decide what, are you going to fight for the academy? Are you going to fight for media? Are you going to fight for the entertainment world? I mean, is that an individual decision that each person has to make on their own?
You want to fight, but how do you?
I don't intend to die on any hills. I'm willing to, but I don't intend to die on hills. The left has not made those hard choices. The left has gone for Hollywood, for the media, for the education institutions, for the corporations, and for the government. They've done it all at the same time. I think we can, too. And I think we should take the battles we can win when we can win them. And we need to be a little less concerned about losing with dignity and a little less concerned about saving our resources. And we just need to go out there and fight on every front.
Fabulous. Michael, appreciate you, man. Keep up the good fight. We're with you on this, so travel on, right?
Well, thank you both. My pleasure to be with you.
Our pleasure. Speechless, controlling words, controlling minds. Michael Knowles, host of the Daily Wire's The Michael Knowles Show. PragerU's The Book Club, his brand new book, Speechless. We'll take a break. We got much more ahead. Stick around. Pittsburgh's Christian Talk, you on the ride home, 101.5 Word FM.